Alright folks, here we are for our third installment of Storytime. This time we are going for a teen book. It is called There Will Come a Darkness. It is by Katy Rose Poole. Haven't had a chance to look at it, but honestly the cover intrigued me. It is actually sometimes fun to judge a book by its cover, or at least be interested by a cover. So we're going to take a peek at this today. Again, we're just going to go with the first chapter right now and kind of see where we go with it. Looks like we're kind of running with something that's a little bit Grecian history by the looks of it, by that map. But I believe it is a completely fantastical world. So looking here, we've got the title page and then the 4 bodily graces. Not sure what those are yet, but we have the grace of heart, enhances strength, agility, speed, and senses. It is wielded by elite fighters. The grace of blood gives and takes energy to heal or harm, and wielded by healers. The grace of mind creates objects imbued with unique properties. It's wielded by alchemists and artificers. And the grace of sight senses and locates living beings, and is wielded by scryers. So we're going to go part 1, Harbinger. Chapter 1, Aphira. In the moonlit room overlooking the city of faith, a priest knelt before Aphira and begged for his life. Please, I don't deserve to die. Please, I won't touch them anymore. I swear, have mercy. Around him, the lavish private room at the Thalassa Gardens Taverna lay in disarray. A sumptuous feast spilled from overturned platters and filigreed pitchers. The white marble floor was littered with ripe berries and the smashed remains of a dozen tiny jewel-like bottles. A pool of blood-dark wine slowly spread toward the kneeling priest. Aphira crouched down, placing her palm upon the papery skin of his cheek. "Oh, thank you," the priest cried, tears springing into his eyes. "Thank you, blessed." "I wonder," Aphira said, "did your victims ever beg you for mercy? When you were leaving your bruises on their bodies, did they ever cry out Behesda's name?" He choked on a breath. "They didn't, did they? You plied them with your monstrous potion to make them docile, so you could hurt them without ever having to see their pain. But I want you to know that every mark you left on them left a mark on you too. Please." A breeze rustled in from the open balcony doors behind Aphira as she tilted the priest's chin towards her. "You've been marked for death, and death has come to collect." His terror-struck eyes gazed up at Aphira as she slid her hand to his throat, where she could feel the rapid tap-tap-tap of his pulse. She focused on the rush of blood beneath his flesh and drew the Esha from his body. The light drained from the priest's eyes as his lungs sputtered out their last breath. He collapsed to the floor. A handprint, as pale as the moon, glowed against the sallow skin of his throat, dead, and only a single mark to show for it. Drawing the dagger from her belt, Aphira leaned over the corpse. The priest had not been alone when she'd found him. The 2 girls he'd had with him, hollow-eyed girls, their wrists mottled with green and purple bruises, had fled the moment Aphira had told them to run, as if they couldn't help but obey. Aphira slid the tip of her blade into the flesh of the priest's throat, cutting a line of red through the pale handprint. As dark blood oozed out, she turned the dagger over and opened the compartment in its hilt to extract the vial within. She held it under the flow of his blood. The priest's desperate words had been a lie. He did deserve death. That wasn't why she'd taken his life. She had taken his life because she needed it. The door burst open, startling Aphira from her task. The vial slipped from her hand. She fumbled with it, but caught it. "Don't move!" 3 men spilled into the suite, one holding a crossbow and the other 2 with sabers. Sentry. Aphira wasn't surprised. Thalassa sat at the edge of Ilia Square, just within the High City gates. She'd known from staking it out that the sentry ran their foot patrols through the square every night. but they'd gotten here quicker than she'd expected. The first sentry through the door stopped short, staring at the priest's body, stunned. "He's dead." Ephira sealed the vial of blood and hid it back within the dagger's hilt. She drew herself up, touching the black silk that covered the bottom of her face to make sure it was still in place. "Come quietly," the first sentry said slowly. "And if you do, you don't have to get hurt." Ephira's pulse hammered in her throat, but she made her voice calm, fearless. "Take another step, and there will be more than one body in this room." The sentry hesitated. "She's bluffing." "She's bluffing." "No, she isn't," the one with the crossbow said nervously. He glanced down at the priest's corpse. "Look at that handprint, just like the ones they found on the bodies in Tersopolis." "The pale hand," the third sentry whispered, frozen as he stared at Ephira. "That's just street lore," the first sentry said, but his voice was trembling slightly. "No one is so powerful that they can kill with only the grace of blood." "What are you doing in Palace Athos?" the third sentry asked her. He stood with his chest out and his feet apart, as if staring down a beast. "Why have you come here?" "You call this place the city of faith, but corruption and evil fester behind these white walls. I will mark them the way I mark my victims, so the rest of the world can see that the city of faith is a city of the fallen." This was a lie. Ephira had not come to the city of faith to stain it with blood, but only 2 other people in the world knew the real reason, and one of them was waiting for her. She moved towards the window. The sentry tensed, but none tried to go after her. "You won't get away with killing a priest so easily," the first said. "We tell the conclave what you've done." "Tell them." She tugged the black hood over her head. "Tell them the pale hand came for the priest of Pallas. And tell them to pray that I don't come for them next." She turned to the balcony, throwing open the satin drapes to the night and the moon that hung like a scythe in the sky. The sentries shouted after her, their blustering voices overlapping as Ephira flew to the edge of the balcony and climbed over the marble balustrade. The world tipped 4 stories below. The steps of Thalassa's entrance gleamed like ivory teeth in the moonlight. She gripped the edge of the balustrade and turned. To her left, the roof of the public baths sloped towards her. Ephira leapt, launching herself toward it. Squeezing her eyes shut, she tucked her knees and braced for impact. She hit the roof at a roll and waited for her own momentum to slow, before picking herself up and racing across it, the voices of the sentry and the lights of Thalassa fading into the night. Ephira moved through the mausoleum like a shadow. The sanctum was still and silent in the pre-dawn darkness as she picked her way through broken marble and other rubble around the tiled scrying pool in the center, the only part of the shrine left unscorched. Above, the caved-in roof gave way to the sky. The ruins of the mausoleum sat just outside the high city gates, close enough that Ephira could easily sneak back into the low city without drawing notice. She didn't know exactly when the mausoleum had been burned down, but it was all but abandoned now, making it the perfect hideout. She slipped through the scorched shrine into the crypt. The stairwell creaked and moaned as she climbed down and wrenched open the rotted wood door to the alcove that had served as her home for the past few weeks. Shedding her mask and hood, she crept inside. The alcove used to be a storeroom for the acolyte caretakers who had tended to the shrine. Now was abandoned, left for rats, rotten, for people like Ephira who didn't mind the other 2. "Your light." Ephira peered through the darkened room to the bed that lay in the corner, shadowed by the tattered sheets that hung over it. Her sister's dark eyes peered back at her. "I know," Ephira said, folding the mask and hood over the back of the chair. A book slid from Beru's chest as she sat up, its pages fluttering as it bounced onto the sheets. Her short curly hair was raked up on one side. "Everything go all right?" "Fine." No point telling how close her escape had been. It was done now. She forced a smile on her face. "Come on, Beru. You know my days of falling off sly house roofs are behind me. I'm better than that now." When Ephira had first assumed the mask of the Pale Hand, she hadn't been quite as good at sneaking around and climbing as she was now. Having the grace of blood didn't help her sneak into crime dens or scale rich merchants' balconies. She'd had to gain such skills the traditional way, spending countless nights honing her balance, reaction time, and strength, as well as gathering information necessary for specific targets. Beru had joined her, when she was well enough, racing Aphira to see who could climb a fence faster or leap between rooftops more quietly. They spent many nights stealing through the shadows, tailing behind a potential mark to learn vices and habits. After years of training and close calls, Aphira knew how to get in and out of the dangerous situations she courted as the pale hand. Beru returned her sister's smile weakly. Aphira's own smile faded, seeing the pain in Beru's eyes. "Come on," she said softly. Beru lifted the rough blanket away from her body. Beneath it, she was shivering, her brown skin ashen in the low light. Tired lines had etched themselves into the skin below her bloodshot eyes. Aphira frowned, turning to the crate beside Beru's bed where a shallow bowl rested. She opened the compartment in her dagger's hilt and poured the contents of the vial into the bowl. "We let this go for too long." "It's fine," Beru hissed through clenched teeth. "I'm fine." She unwrapped the cotton from her left wrist, revealing the black handprint that marred the skin beneath it. Aphira pressed her hand into the bowl, coating it with wet blood. Placing her bloody palm over the dark handprint on her sister's skin, she closed her eyes and focused on the blood, guiding the Esha she'd taken from the priest and directing it into her sister. The blood Aphira collected from her victims acted as a conduit to the Esha she drained from them. If she were a properly trained healer, she would have known the correct patterns of binding that would tether her victim's Esha to Beru. She wouldn't need to use the binding of blood. And then again, if Aphira were properly trained, she wouldn't have been killing in the first place. Healers with the grace of blood took an oath that forbid drawing Esha from another person. But this was the only way to keep her sister alive. "There," Aphira said, pressing a finger into Beru's skin, which was starting to lose that worrying grayish tinge. "All better." For now. Beru didn't say, but Aphira could see the words in her sister's eyes. Beru reached over and opened the drawer of the table beside the bed, withdrawing a thin black stylus. With careful, practiced motions, she pressed the stylus against her wrist, drawing a small, straight line there. It joined the 13 others, permanently etched in alchemical ink. 14 people killed, 14 lives cut short so that Beru could live. It wasn't lost in Aphira, the way Beru marked her skin each time. She could see the way the guilt ate at her sister after every death. The people Aphira killed were far from innocent, but that didn't seem to matter to Beru. "This could be the last time we have to do this," Aphira said quietly. This was the real reason they'd come to Palace Athos. Somewhere in the city of fallen faith and grumbling temples, there was a person who knew a way to heal Beru for good. It was the only thing Aphira had hoped for in the last 5 years. Beru looked away. "I brought you something else," Aphira said, making her voice light. She reached into the little bag that hung at her belt and held out a glass bottle stopper she picked up off the ground in the priest's room. "I thought you could use it for the bracelet you're making." Beru took the bottle stopper, turning it over in her hand. It looked like a little jewel. "You know I'm not going to let anything happen to you," Aphira said, covering her sister's hand with her own. "I know," Beru swallowed. "You're always worrying about me. Sometimes I think that's all you do. But, I worry about you too, every time you're out there." Aphira tapped her finger against Beru's cheek in reproach. "I won't get hurt." Beru brushed her thumb across the 14 ink lines on her wrist. "That's not what I mean." Aphira drew her hand away. "Go to sleep." Beru rolled over and Aphira climbed into the bed beside her. She lay listening to her sister's even breaths, thinking about the worry that Beru would not give a name to. Aphira worried too, on nights like tonight, when she felt her victim's pulse slow and then stop, when she pulled the last dregs of life from them. Their eyes went dark, and Aphira felt a sweet, sated relief, and in equal measure, a deep, inescapable fear that killing monsters was turning her into one. I apologize for the beeping. Apparently, Facebook was having a little bit of a